as you heard, I'm Lesley Ann Foster from Masimanyane Women's Rights International, and what I'm going to share with you today is my journey to doing this work on violence against women and the role that God played in it, which I think is really remarkable. And I am basing this on Scripture, Timothy 2, verses 7 to 9, which is, God has not given me a spirit of fear, but a spirit of love, of wisdom, and of sound mind. It's something that has guided me all of my life through what I do. Believe you me, as much as we worship and pray and read scriptures, fear is something we face on a regular basis. And how we overcome that is the story of faith. So I want to start my story many years ago. I was working in Cape Town. I was in business, so I was doing a lot of work with Carlton Paper at the time. I started a new division for them, and I did a lot of work in that corporate that was quite exciting for me. And then something happened. My husband at the time was called to come back to East London, and I almost refused to come. But then my dad got cancer, and so I knew that I had to come back here. But the reason why I didn't want to come back, I was offered a transfer from Carlton Paper, and something very strong inside of me said, don't take that transfer. And I couldn't understand it. It was completely confusing, and I was so restless, through that, because I was thinking I need, we all think we need the money, we need to work, we need to, whatever. But something was very, very clear inside of me. It said, don't take that up. So I returned to East London, and this restlessness was so strong in me. The first Sunday I went to church, there was somebody ministering about Daily Bread Children's Mission, and I sat there, and somehow it just resonated with me, and I felt very strongly that I needed to go into this. But as I sat and listened to the ministry, my head was saying, you don't have the skills, you don't have the training, you don't. So everything was coming up to say, you want to do this, and you have that very strong feeling, but actually, you're not the right person for it. But I was praying alongside of that, and when the church finished, I went to the minister and I said, I just feel so strongly that I should be working with you, but I'm not. And of course, I'm putting forward the excuses. I'm not trained, I'm not this, I'm not that. And he said, what did you do? So I said, business. And he said, okay, come and see me. So I was very excited and still in fear and still in denial, that I could make any kind of contribution. So I went to see him, and he said, look, we have a resource center, and we do the fundraising from that, and maybe you can bring your business skills into that. And I thought, yes, that's what I'm going to do. So I joined, and this was when Daily Bread was in its formative years. It was in St. Saviour's Church. The children were kept there, they slept there, they did everything there. So, and underneath the church was this basement, and the resource center was in the basement. So my daily interaction was with these children, And at the time, they were around 12 or so. They're all now in their late 40s. And I still have contact with many of them. But I wanted to do a course in childcare when it came up. And I said, to the leadership, look, I'd love to do this course. And they said, but it's not related to what you're doing. You're doing the resource center. And that time, the resource center was running soup kitchens. So I was raising, not money, but I was bringing in food. And I was bringing in, the necessary resources to run the food, the soup kitchens. But I then went and I enrolled on my own because I was getting the message that I needed to do that. And it was such a powerful course because it taught me about how to work with children, okay? And one of the things, I cannot remember the woman's name who was the trainer at the time. She was an English woman working at this London Children's Home and King Williamstown Children's Home. And she said something to me that I think might resonate with a lot of people here. She taught us that a child, any child, will survive and exist to great heights if it has one person, just one person, who believes in that child and who's totally enamored with that child. So a child only needs one person. The rest of its environment can be negative, but that one person makes a difference. And I always remember that because it's so true. It's so true. But the neglect that children face today is unbelievable. Yet only one, we need just that one thing. So I did the course and I became more involved with the children. And at the time there was a woman working there. She was a retired nurse. Her name was Mrs. Connie Ngaba. I don't know if anybody knows Auntie Connie. But she had worked with my mother, who was also a nurse, and so she took me under her wing. And I think she liked having a younger woman with her. At the time I was still in my 20s, I think. No, early 30s. And she took me along with her to everything that she was, involved with the children. One of which was the reunification of children with their families. So I used to go into these homes and be with her when she was doing the engagement and negotiations with families. And we came across a lot of deprivation, a lot of poverty, a lot of inequality, drug abuse, that made it impossible for the families to actually give those children a sound base. In many instances, we were able to restore the children to those families and then put in the support mechanisms for them. I learned all about that. But what was very important was that some of the children who came to us didn't know their names, didn't know their first names, they had been given nicknames, didn't know their family names, didn't know who their fathers were. And for many of the children, one of the most important things was that they needed to know their clan names. And they didn't know these things. So we used to go out and really work. There was no internet. There was no all this fancy stuff today. Push telegraph was how things worked for us. And so we would ask by word of mouth, or go to where the child said he came from and ask people, do you know this child? Do you know the family? And so forth. It was very important for them, especially because we had a predominance of boys. I don't know if you still have that at Daily Bread. And for them, they wanted that, that clan name. They often didn't know who their fathers were either. And we all, through that, found that the mothers were vulnerable to betrayal, abandonment, and of course, violence. And through that work, I started to feel that we needed to work with the women, strengthen them, strengthen their support mechanism in order to have the children not dislocate from their families and to have that support system. So very much the work that I was doing was coming out of working with the street children and was informed by that. And then I decided, you know what, I'm going to do this. And one day I was lying on the floor in Missions to Seaman. I don't know if you remember that old place down Oxford Street. It's now called Maria Makeba Center, but Daily Bread was in that building. And I was lying on the floor with two women. The one is called Rebecca. She's still at Daily Bread. I saw her last week. The other one is called Vuyelwa. And I said to them, I want to start this center for women. What can I call it? I don't know why I was asking them, I could have done anything. And they lay on the floor, and the three of us were lying, and they were going Simonye and going backwards and forwards, all kinds of names. And they came up with the name Masimanyane. And I'm so grateful to them to this day, and I talk about it all the time, because it was like women naming themselves the organization that was going to come into being. Then there was a crisis at Daily Bread. And in that crisis, I was talking to the leadership then about starting this. And the one leader said to me, "You're too stupid to start anything. You'd never be able to sustain it." And I was so hurt. I believed it in that moment, that I didn't have the requisite skills and knowledge to start something, because he was saying, you started here with us, and he saw the opportunity. And I was so upset, I ran across the road to Lawyers for Human Rights, who was there at the time, and I spoke to a woman who was a paralegal there in Tombazana Botha. She became deputy minister of two portfolios later on. And I sat there and I was shaking, with anger, fear, whatever. And I said to her, you know what this guy just said to me? And I said that I'm too stupid and I'm this and that. And she looked at me, much older than me she is. She was 80 this week. She said to me, you want to start a center for abused women? And I said, yes. And she said, and you're allowing this man to abuse you? And it was like a light bulb moment, an epiphany for me. I got up from the chair and I went across the road. I picked up my handbag and I left, never went back again. And so the fear I was feeling just went away with her words and her encouragement. So a few days after that, I met a guy called Reggie Naidu who ran IBEC, which was an entrepreneurship organization. He was giving funding to people who start businesses. And I said to him, no, he said to me, I hear from my wife that you want to start the center. And I said, yes, because I felt it quite strongly. And then he said, so why haven't you done it? And I said, I don't have any money. And he said, how much money do you need? And he sat down, and I said, I don't know, okay? I didn't do the homework. And then we sat down, and he worked out a small budget, and he said, look, you're going to need 60,000 for 6 months, basically. And then I said, I agreed with him. Didn't know anything about numbers then. And then he said, I'll give it to you as startup funding. You can pay it back when you have the money. And I was so shocked. And then he said to me, what is your next problem? And I find that quite interesting because we problematize everything, even when we're getting the gifts from God. And I said to him, I don't have a building. And he said, okay, I got that. Just moved out of a double-story building in Albany Street, belongs to Dr. Apavu. Tell him to give it to you for rent 6 months free. And I did that. So that's also the way in which God always provides for you, I had no more excuses. So next day I was in the building, and, okay, not the next day. Let me just, this is not, I digress a bit. At that moment, a friend of mine from Johannesburg phoned me and she said, look here, we're having a family violence conference. She was working for Women Opposing Women Abuse Power. And she said, come to the conference. I said, okay. So I went to the conference. And at the conference, Deputy Minister Thabo Mbeki was there. They had lined up a whole lot of women to tell their stories of abuse. So she said to me, sitting in the audience, listen, so-and-so has pulled out. She doesn't want to tell her story anymore. Don't you want to tell your story? And I was so shocked, And then I just said yes. I said yes. Now, that was crazy because the women who were going to speak had been prepared by psychologists over a period of time to give their testimonies. My friend Anu knew we both had been victims of childhood sexual abuse, and we'd both suffered domestic violence in our marriages. So she knew my story. So I get up to talk at this conference and bawled my eyes out. I don't know if anybody heard anything I was trying to say, but I was just crying. And it was a moment, of release and all sorts of things. And then later on, when I went into the washrooms, this woman comes up to me, and she's beautiful, blonde-haired, young woman, comes to me and she says, thank you for your testimony, and I know it was very difficult, but I really appreciate it, and so forth. And she gives me her name. Her name was Marika, and she was from an organization called Mama Cash in Holland. And a few days later, I was driving down Fleet Street, and who crosses my path but Marika? And I think, what this is like crazy. So I stop, and I called to her, and she came, and I said, how come you're here? And she said, we're funding some organization here. So I said, oh, please, can we have lunch or coffee or whatever? I can't remember what it was. And then I said to her, can we, and I'm telling her my vision. And then she says to me, I'll give you the funding to get started. Seed funding. It was 5,000 guilders. Those days it was guilders, there was no euro. And I was so stunned. But the point I'm trying to make is that all along my journey, God had already set out the steps that I had to take. And God made provision every part of the way. The provision wasn't always money. In fact, most cases it wasn't money, but it was people giving me direction, people sharing their wisdom, people sharing their knowledge and their skills and so forth. It was amazing. So then I got into that building eventually. This was definitely after the conference, and after I took Marika with me to meet Dr. Apavu when I went to ask him for the building. And of course he said yes. So she understood that this was like a serious thing, it was moving forward. So got into the building on the first day, and I'm sitting there. Reggie had left me a desk, a few chairs, and a phone. And I have no clue what I'm going to do. No clue. So I pick up the phone and I phone Reggie and I say, Reggie, listen, I'm sitting here now and I don't know what to do. Reggie says, phone every woman you know. Share your vision with them. Call them into a meeting and they will tell you what to do. And that wisdom has been so powerful because it's not my wisdom and my experience and knowledge that shapes the work. It's the women who come and give me their own, vision and ideas. And then a woman called me, her name was Joan Wigley, and her husband had told her about my work. So one of the things I did, and I learned this from an organizational development course I was doing. The lecturer there, Rams Ramashia, said, tell everybody your vision. Tell everybody your vision so that you own it and it's yours. And I did that. And then and people were coming because I had shared that vision. So this woman phoned me and she said, listen, I'm a survivor and I want to be part of your organizations. I'm like, okay, well, what do you do? And I didn't know what I needed, okay, I didn't know. So she said, no, I've learned to do reflexology and I've learned to do Reiki, so I can do some healing, for the women that you're helping. At that point, I had no women that I was helping, no one. Anyway, so then I said to her, okay, come. And basically, Joan and I kind of walked that road together. We walked that road because in that year, started in January, in May, my dad died. And that was and remains like the biggest loss in my life because I really, really loved my dad. And she was there with me. God sent angels. There was another woman, Zinnie Garden, who just came and sat with me for a month and said nothing. Allowed me to cry, allowed me to talk, said nothing. And those are the angels that God sends us when we need it. So there's always someone that comes or something that happens. So I called the women, and then women came. That was a very difficult process because it was the beginning of our democracy. The ANC Women's League wanted to own it. Sanko wanted that. Everybody wanted to own this thing, and I didn't know how to work with it, But I knew that I had to work with this vision that I had and not make it, and Reggie was important in saying, make it apolitical, make it, a this, a that, whatever, just keep it a woman-focused thing. And recently, Minister Mafu came to me and she said, I was there at the beginning. I'm so glad that you didn't take a different route, but that you stuck to your vision, and you stuck to what God was telling you to do at the time. The first client who came was a woman that was 3 years old, and she was sent from Lawyers for Human Rights in Ntombazana Botha. Her mum came, she had been raped, and they had no recourse. The police were saying, no, she's too young, she can't give a testimony, blah, blah, blah. And so, in my domheid, my ignorance, I picked up the phone and phoned the Minister of Justice and said, Dala Oma, I said, I've got this 3-year-old girl, this is what's happened, don't know what to do. Now, you don't do that. There's a protocol where you have to go through this one and that one and whatever. I didn't know that. I was completely ignorant. I just got, and I happened to get his phone number because my uncle, Joe Foster, was his friend. So I phoned him and I said, this is the problem. He dispatched Vusi Pakoli, he dispatched Manto Chabalala, Nsimang, come go to Masimanyane, because then women's rights and women's issues became the flavor of the moment. And we caught that wave just as it was rising. So we got the training, the knowledge, the support from that. Shortly after that, Dala Omar invited me to a conference in Brighton in the UK, which was on violence against women. And I went. I took somebody with me because I asked him I said, I don't want to go alone. I want somebody else to come with me. Now, let me tell you something. One of the important principles of what you do is you never walk alone. You never keep any gift that you have to yourself. Every gift that you get, you have to share with someone else. That's what stewardship in our Christian teaching is about. You take somebody with you. And I promise you something, the fact that I've always done that, always stuck to that principle, has just made our organization grow in ways we could not have thought possible. So Dala Omar also came to the opening of the center, and because he came to the opening of the center, and they were first generation leaders in the country of the democratic system, the whole legislature came. The provincial legislature. Trudy Thomas was, one of the big names at that time. Lots of people, I can't remember all of them, but they all came to the launch of it. And that also then just put the organization, on the map, as it were. So you have to respond to what God is talking to you about and working within yourself. When you think about this. Now, after that, I went, so that was my first trip. And in that conference that I went to in the UK, I went to one, side meeting, and there was a group of women there. One of whom was an Indian woman called Rachel Erpen Paul. And she gave me her card. We didn't have much discussion at all. But a few weeks later, another organization phoned me up and said, we've got to go to Norway and we need to have a woman in the delegation. And somebody mentioned your name. Now, this is like new days. We were new kids on the block, knew nothing. And I was so stunned by that. And then I went with them to Norway. I promise you something, I was terrified taking that trip. Terrified. Because I just thought I didn't have anything to contribute. And you know how I got through it? I don't know what people have lots of fancy things that they do to strengthen their faith. What I do is I journal. So I took a book and I wrote down that God does not give me a spirit of timidity, but a spirit of power, love. And I just kept on writing the same verse over and over and over and over and over again. And in that way, I developed my strength and my courage and my faith. It's something I still do, not as much as I did then, but just writing that down made a difference. And I also had the card of this woman, so I phoned her up and I said, look, I'm coming to Norway and I wonder if if I can meet with you. And she was so thrilled, this woman. So she is from India originally, but her husband had moved into the oil industry in Norway, so she was living there. She still lives there. And we're still friends to this day. I speak every week. But then when I got there, she introduced me to a whole bunch of people, one of which was somebody called Marius Rochel, and he's from an organization called Alternative to Violence. Still my best friend today. We speak every week. And I promise you something, I learned a lot from that. And it was a very, very scary trip for me because I thought I didn't have anything to share. And I had to speak at all the universities, all the universities, because the invitation came from the academics and students of Norway in support of South Africa. So I went around to all this. It was really an amazing kind of experience. I remember flying into Tromsø, which is in the north of Norway, and I flew in a snowstorm. It was the scariest thing ever, because that plane was like, shivering, trembling. And I was sitting in the middle, so I was holding on to the two students that were accompanying me. And they were like, no, the pilots are trained. I don't know. I don't care if the pilots were trained. That didn't make any sense to me. They can do this in the snowstorm. But anyway, they did. We got to Tromsø, middle of winter, minus 40 degrees. They don't have anything that grows there because of the cold, so they import everything. And it was an amazing experience. I actually happened to go to Tromsø a second time, which I think is really amazing. And all of this is what God puts in your way, to do. It doesn't come out of anywhere, and it's there for a reason. The second time I went, it was the University Women Association had some big conference there. And then I met another woman from South Africa called Diana Russell. And it was such an amazing meeting because she was working on violence against women herself. She was the sister of Bishop David Russell, whom some of you, a very famous person in South Africa at one time. Anyway, so that was my second trip to Norway. But I also, out of that trip, made a partnership with the Women's Shelter Movement of Norway. And they were our first international donors. So what happened from that trip was I started to interact with people from other countries for learning. They were ahead of us in a lot of things. They had a shelter movement. We had nothing. They were working in the trafficking of women and girls. So also the subjects that I was working with became broader and deeper because of the interaction with other people. And one of the things I always tell Rachel, this one of my moments of growth, my realization that I'd grown, is when I went back to Norway to the second conference. I didn't have that fear. And that was it was for me a moment when I could measure, the growth. And through Rachel, who was working for Norwegian Church Aid at the time, I ended up doing work in Jordan. She was based there. And then I ended up working in Iraq, because she was working with Iraqi women. And then in Jordan, they had a network of 9 countries, Syria, Egypt, it's sort of in the Middle East, Kuwait. I ended up working in Kuwait, scariest country ever. Iraq was such a strange experience for me, because all we got from the media was about these violent Muslim people and all that. So I got to Iraq early morning, and I was very tired, and I went to sleep. And then I woke up at lunchtime, I had a shower, and I thought I must eat, and I went down. Went into the dining room hall, and there were about 300 people. There was a massive hotel. There was not one scarf in sight, not one person in a burqa. And it was a cultural shock for me, because in my worldview, there was all this conservatism and all that. And every house in this part it was called Erbil, had this huge lit up cross on it. It's a big thing in Iraq, if you're Christian, to have this cross. Like you have Christmas lights outside, their homes have these big crosses. And I was like, it's hard when you come across that to kind of find the balance in it, And then later on, I had some of these women from Iraq come to South Africa, and they belong to the Coptic Christian church, and they remind us every day that they were the first Christians and they were the first people, and we have this joke about, all of that. It was also the church, if you remember once, that somebody went in and shot dead all the priests and 42 people. That was Lisa Hido's church. That they're still busy with. So, people come under attack in different ways in the work that they do. And it's always I had that experience very early on where there was resistance to the work I was doing. And then I was being followed. And my mother at the time, it was my early days, was terrified of this. And I don't know where this came from, but I said to my mom one day, Mom, I'm prepared to die for the work that I'm doing. I'm prepared to die for it. And it was such a freeing thing because I could have lived in fear, but I didn't. I chose not to live in fear because I knew that I was divinely guided and protected in this work. So the work has taken me to many countries. It's taken me, I've built this organization not alone. Built this organization through the work of many other people who feel committed and dedicated to our ministry. And I made sure that, and I continue to make sure that I work in all of the areas that, where I'm called. One of the things that happened to me, I'll never forget this, my mom had colon cancer, and she had an op to remove, the part that had cancer. And she was in hospital, just out of ICU, and I was visiting her, and a call came through. I was on my cell phone this time from this friend of mine, Rachel, and she said to me, Lesley, and you have to come and work with me in Turkey. And I said, Rachel, I can't. My mother has just come out of ICU, and she's lying here, and I'm in hospital. I really can't come. It's not the time for me. And my mom said, let me speak to Rachel. And she took the phone from me and she said, Rachel, Lesley Ann will come. I'm telling her that she will come. And I was so taken away, and I said, Mom, but I can't do this. And my mom said, when the women call you, you go. And it was something she had learned because she did similar work to me as a community nurse. And I felt very bad about it, and I thought, what can I do? So then I phoned my son. No, my son was there. He was in the hospital with me. And I said, but I can't, I was worried about my mom because she had to be looked after and so forth. And my son said, Mom, I'll do it. He was in his 20s probably. And he went to the surgeon, Dr. Wakefield, and said, how do I look after my granny? She had a colostomy at the time that had to be colostomy bag, and had to be cleaned and all that. And she was a bit, embarrassed by it. And the surgeon just told him, you do this and that and that. And for the week that I was away, the 10 days, he cared for my mother. And when I look back on it today, I realize how important that was for him and for her and for their relationship. And so there were those moments that were very difficult for me. One of the other difficulties was that I had a little daughter at the time, that I had also got through Daily Bread, and I was raising her. All the time I was traveling up and down, and she didn't want to travel. I took her with me a couple of times, so she's had that experience, and then she was like, you know what, I don't want to do this. When she was little, you have to take off your cap, and then your scarf, and then your jacket, and then your jersey, and then you have to put it all back again, because I was traveling a lot in winter, and she just didn't like that. So I made the decision that she had to, have a good support system. Of course, my parents were there. She always stayed at home, but I had solid support for her. But it was, and it is a loss to me that a lot of that time I wasn't there. I missed her birthday only once. And before I left on a trip, I had a party for her at home, a party at school. We did family lunch. She always has festivals, 3 days at least. But she still reminds me I wasn't there on the day. It's a joke between us, but those are the losses, because it's not easy sailing. Doing this work is not easy. The other thing I want to say is I faced so much fear along the way. There were always difficulties, always I can't. Even when I left and my mum was ill, I had a degree of fear in me about what would happen if, my mum passed on. She was in her late 70s, and I was away. How would I feel about that? That was a big thing for me because I didn't want that, to happen. There were fears. There was one time when I had no money, not a cent, and I had to pay salaries. And I just prayed about that. I prayed and prayed and prayed, and then I had the idea to call a woman in London called Helen Pankhurst. She's the granddaughter of the famous Emily Pankhurst. And I said to Helen, I have to pay salaries and I have no money. And she said, how much do you need? And I said, I need 20,000 I can't remember if it was rand or pounds. I can't remember which time it was. And she said, okay, I'll sort it out for you. And within 2 days, that money was in my bank account. So the point I'm trying to make is that the journey is not an easy one. It's not an easy one. It's a very difficult one. The other problem that I really struggle with is human resources, working with the people in the organization. Every one of the people in our organization is a wounded healer. They are wounded themselves. They come from, and that was something that I intentionally did, was to take women from communities. I wasn't looking for the professionals. I came under attack for that, but I believed that we had the wisdom, that is innate to ourselves and that comes through us through our Christian teaching and so forth, to do this work. A lot of people said it wasn't possible, but believe you me, it is possible. Everybody has wisdom. No matter, even if you have never read a book in your life, you have wisdom, you have skills, you have capacity, and I just believe that. That was something people don't understand about me and question it a lot, but I believed in it because my mother raised me to believe that everybody was equal. Equal, equal, equal. There's no inequality. Even if you've got a master's degree and a PhD, a woman that's illiterate in the village is equal to you in her humanity. And that's something that people don't always get. So, I don't know what story I was telling you now. I'm maybe talking too much. But I think so some of the decisions that I took along the way, for instance, just digressing now, is the women that came to work with us in the first cohort of women were not educated. Some of them had grade 2, some of them had whatever. I made the decision that all of those women would have equal opportunity. So when we got invited to international conferences, I took the cleaner. I took the woman that was like the least, the telephonist, whatever, to do that. And it transformed their lives, which proved what I was saying. I mean, the one is a manager now. A couple of them are managers now from not having had that. We also invested in their education, which was very important. And what I was trying to say earlier on was about the difficulties, and sometimes they were overwhelming. There was a time when I felt I just can't do this anymore. I need to leave now. And I went to Wynand, who was on my board of directors, and I said, Wynand, you know what, I'm going to resign. I want to leave now. And he asked me, why do you want to go? And I said, I'm in the same place all this time, and I mean, it's time for other people to join. And Wynand said, it's not the same organization. It's not the same organization. It has changed and, it has evolved. So the point of, I wanting to leave because I was, it was the same, I was in the same place, was not valid. It's not valid now either. Many of my colleagues moved into other jobs, other areas of work, did much bigger work. But one of the strengths of my organization is that I stayed. And you build on what you have by staying. There were new networks, new people, new sources of money, new all kinds of things, but huge trust and came out of that. It's very difficult work. On Friday, I was asked to be on Radio 702 from 10 o'clock until 11 o'clock, and it's something about South Africans doing, important things. And the interviewer said to me that somebody had said to him that he interviewed that violence against women is just a sector that we don't actually want to end. We are upholding it because it gives us jobs and money and stuff. And I was I kept my cool, but I said to him, this work is incredibly difficult. Every day we face women that have brutally been raped. Little girls who had their eyes gouged out at 11. Women that die, you remember Uinene Mkhotanya. Lots of women, that whose stories we live with and we take into ourselves. So there's a lot of pain and suffering that we face on a daily basis. We can only do it through our faith. We can only do that. I believe in praying without ceasing. all the time I have prayers that roll through my head. I might have started them when I was 18 years old, but it's the thing that keeps me going. And that pain and suffering God gives us. God does not give you a burden that you cannot carry. That's the one thing that I've learned very, very strongly. And sometimes we go down. So I wanted just you to recite with me the Psalm 23, because I want to talk to it a little bit. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He restores my soul. He leads me beside still waters. Yeah. I can't hear you. Yes. Yes. Exactly. Yeah. So what I like about that psalm is it says, the Lord is my shepherd. Now, every morning when I wake up, I listen to Maverick City, Elevation Maverick City, and they sing, I shall not want. And one of the things I've learned in my ministry is that you will not want. You will not want. You sometimes think you want, but you don't, because God is always there. And when you have God at the center of your work, you don't. The other part of it is that we go through, walking through the still waters, walking, along the easy paths, and that's wonderful when we have that. But we also walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And I'm going to end off with a story now, is that the beginning of last year, I started to worry because we weren't bringing in as much funding as we could. And I could see that we didn't have money. So we do the predictions a year. I've done the predictions for 3 years, okay? What do they call it, Wynand? The cash flow, whatever. Those things accountants talk about. And because I have to look, I can't look at what's happening now, but you have to look ahead. That's also something that's important and responsibility you have. And I worried, I thought, where are we going to get this money? I also knew that I wasn't able to go out and raise funds in the same way that I do. The reason for that was that just a month before COVID, the person who supported me the most is a guy called Christopher Harper. He was our minister then. He left after 21 years. And Christopher was the one that did all our back work, back office work. I'd give him a vision, he'd write a proposal, I would refine that proposal, we'd send it out, we'd get money. So I lost that capacity. And with that, I also lost some of my faith in myself. A month after he left, COVID hit. And I had to move this whole organization through the COVID pandemic. It was horrific because one of the things we had to do was keep our services going. We are an essential service. We had to be there for women, and everybody was predicting women were going to have, higher levels of violence and so forth because of the lockdowns. So I sat with my management team and we worked on protocols. Not an easy thing. We couldn't bring women into the shelter in case we brought COVID into it. We had to lock down women in the shelter. And then we had to have an isolation room. So if somebody was desperate and had to come in, they had to go into isolation and stay there for 21 days, if you remember that. It was all very difficult. And my staff lost 85 family members in total. I lost 18 in 2 weeks. Not just family members, but families and colleagues and so forth. In 2 weeks, 18 people. So the heaviness, the sadness in the organization was tremendous. But the other thing was everybody was scared they would lose their jobs. And then they were, all like beset with how would we survive, what would happen. But one of the decisions my board took was that we would not take away the salaries, take away, penalize staff in any way. They didn't know that. I knew it. And afterwards I learned that I didn't communicate it properly to them. But walking through the valley of the shadow of death, we should have no fear. if we believe in God. Most recently, I was struggling with this issue around fundraising and funding. I didn't have the freedom to go out anymore because my organization has local level work. It is nationally rooted. I'm in the presidency now, part of the president's GBV team, and it's hectic. Part of the work I was doing yesterday was just for the presidency. And then we have an international network on violence against women. We have an African network on violence against women, and I sit and chair the board of International Women's Rights Action Watch, works in 72 countries. And I tell you, those women that I sit with are not easy. Some of them are terrible opstokers, you know, those people that make trouble all the time. And every day, this morning when I woke up at like 4 o'clock this morning, is like 27 messages because they're in Malaysia, they're in Singapore, they're in Australia, they're 12 hours ahead, 8 hours ahead. And when I wake up, it's like a barrage of things, and they're all fighting, and I can't do this anymore, and I'm the chair. And I've had my foot out of that organization for like 5 years, and God's kept me there, you know, because I'm the peacemaker. So those difficulties are there, but then the psalm, and sometimes I have to just repeat Psalm 23 all the time to remind myself that I am supported. And the song that I listen to every single morning is I Shall Not Want. And such an important, and it's I shall not want when I'm on the mountaintops. I shall not want when I'm in the valley of the shadow of death. And then the second one is Jireh. I don't know if you know that one that says, I am so loved. And it's a reminder every day that I am loved. But in the last few months, in this year, my finance person came to me and she said, Lesley, we haven't got money. And I'm like, what do you mean we haven't got money? So there's also a contradiction here, because for the international network, I've got a fat pot of money, which we haven't spent and can't spend for all sorts of reasons. But in Masimanyane itself, you know, we didn't have enough money. And then I decided I'm putting a prayer group together. So one morning in prayers, we pray every single morning before we start our day. And there's a lot of people now, but we stand together and we pray. And I just had this message, put a prayer group together. So I called 5 of the women, 5 or 6 of them, I can't remember, after the prayer meeting. And I said, can you just stay behind a moment, please? And I said to them, you know what, I want you to pray for the organization. Pray for and the one woman was the oldest there. She's oldest being the first group of women I trained, said Lesley, and there's so much tension and conflict. You know, we're a whole bunch of women together, and there is that thing that happens. And she said, okay, we'll pray for that. And I said, and also pray for the funding, because, you know, I'm worried about that. Immediately, about a week or 2 after that, I get a document, and it's a funding agreement from a donor I had not asked for money for. And it was for 7 million rand. Just like that. And I phoned these people and I said, but I didn't ask you. She said, no, we sent it to you because we thought maybe you will want to do this work in Buffalo City. So it was 7 million. It did mean we had to employ 15 more people, but that's a killer. But you know, God provides. And I said to them, but that's so amazing. And I called the women and I said, you know, you're praying for this. And I will tell you that my faith wavered. Many times, even most recently, every time when we do the review of the finances, I think, oh my word, how are we going to get through this? And then through the presidency, the president has a private office. And that office cannot get money from the treasury for the work on gender-based violence. So they asked Masimanyane, would we be the fiscal agent for this money? We said yes. And so they get money. It's for special projects. It's not massive amounts of money, you know, like government has. It'll be 2 million or whatever. But we started to get 10% management fee from all of that money. And that, it's like drips of money. but it carried us through. And then Bev, who's my finance person, would come and she'd say, oh, Lesley, we've got enough money until June. Then it was enough money until August. Then Grant Sinclair, who was a finance guy, said, let me look at the figures. Because actually the predictions, they were spending less than the actual predictions. So that's why we kept on, being able to have more money. Eventually they came and they said, we've got money until November. And I thought, oh my word, what now? So they praying, I'm feeling fear, but I'm praying anyway. And I'm praying. I go to my board and my board gives me a little bit of it. They're very, very respectful. Give me a little bit of a tongue lashing. Oh, you haven't done this, you haven't done that. And in all of this, I've also said that I want to retire next year. And I'm thinking, how do I retire when the organization is in this predicament? So the women continued. The other day I said to them, are you people still praying? They say, yes, we get up at 12 o'clock every night and we pray. In the meantime, last year in January, I had approached Ford Foundation and said to them, listen, I want to leave the organization. And I know that you have a special fund called the Build Grant, which is a transitional grant. And this is a transition when I leave the organization and so forth. And leaving for me is moving from the position I am as executive director, because one of the things I started to notice was that I was falling behind in terms of understanding the changes, the geopolitical changes that are happening. Everything is now digitalized and, they're using AI and all these amazing things. And a few weeks ago, I said to my grandson, who's into nutrition, he's 14 years old, I said to him, Granny, he's got such a terrible problem with rheumatoid arthritis and this and that and the other. And he said, Granny, I'm going to send you some information. And within an hour, he sent me like a book of information on all these different things I was talking to him about. And I said, where did you get this from? And he said, AI, Granny, AI. And I was like, what's AI? Artificial intelligence. And I've been seeing this and realizing that we need younger people to come into this. And then I told this donor, I said, I want money to build a team of young people to take over the organization because, like Vainan said earlier, we are here for a season. And you need to know when you must move on. Okay, my body's telling me now, listen, time up, you've got to go. And so spoke to this donor and she said, oh, I'm so excited and really this, that, and the other. I told her my plan, and I got a consultant to help me. It was very traumatizing because she said to me, give me a date when you want to leave. And I had no date, because you say you're leaving, but you're still holding on. That's what it can look like. And eventually I got through all of that and made a decision that I would leave by April next year. I wanted to finish the audited financial statements, leave in April. And then my plan is to walk the Camino. And I want to do all 800 kilometers of it as a symbol of walking out of my organization and walking into a new life. Okay, that's another thing. So that's what my retirement plan is. Right now, I can hardly walk 1 kilometer, so that's going to be an interesting journey. Then, about a week ago, I was praying. And I every single morning, I'm up at 4:30, I do my prayers before I go to sleep, I do my prayers. And suddenly I was like, you know what? I don't know how I'm going to cope because we don't have enough money. And there are lots of things I can't do and want to do because of that. And I just don't know, and I'm like, Lord, I've prayed, I've asked. And in that moment, something reminded me that for 26 years, God has answered every prayer. For 26 years, God answered every prayer. And I thought, why would I struggle? And in that moment, in the time of my meditation, something just went. Something like, there was like a letting go of the fear and the unknowingness and the, all of the indecision. I don't know what the words are, but you know what I'm talking about. It just went. And there was a calmness that came over my spirit. Just a calmness that came over my spirit. Then I got this invitation by this donor, the same one, to come to a meeting on Thursday this week, Reinhard. Okay, so it's fresh news. And I walked into her offices. I didn't want to go because I was not feeling well. And I walked into her office and she said to me, "Oh, I've got good news for you." And I said, "What?" And she said, "Your transitional grant has been approved for 5 years. 5 years." So, and for me, it's mega millions. That's all I'm saying. I'm not giving you the numbers, but it's mega millions. And I said, I just cried. The tears came to my eyes, and I was astonished. And then I sent a message to my board of directors and so forth, just to say, look, it's been approved now. It took 18 months. I know this. It's not done yet. It takes 2 years for you to really hunker this down. But it also only comes because of what you've built. The road you've walked, your integrity, your authenticity, all of those things they culminate at some point. But I also know that it is God saying to me, this is your moment to move on, because I'm not leaving an organization that's in desperate need. I'm leaving an organization that will be stable for at least 4 years. I'm saying 4 years because it's a year for me to leave, and then it's 4 years when they can find their own way around how they build and what direction they take. So God doesn't just look after you in the moment, but God looks after you in the future. And so many of us are fearful of that, fearful of how we move forward and what we do. But I really want to, I did some work, to prepare for this. Just give me a moment. I wanted to end with, if I can find it now, just give me, yeah. So, here we go. I have it somewhere here. Yeah, I just wanted to go back to Timothy 2 in conclusion, and that's verses 7 to 14. And we, we hear the words are, I thank God whom I serve with a pure conscience, as my forefathers did. And as without ceasing I remember you in my prayers, night and day, greatly desiring to see you again. Okay? And those are important things, because we do have to pray without ceasing. We find ourselves in difficult situations, but you can get out of it with that kind of constant prayer. Greatly desiring to see you, being mindful of your tears, that I may be filled with joy. When I call to remembrance the genuine faith that is in you, which is dwelt first in your forebears, I'm also persuaded in you also. Therefore, I remind you to stir up the gift of God, which is in you through the laying of hands. I think this is such an important message to us. It's saying that we need to stir up the gifts that are within us. And I wonder how many of us here today are sitting with a gift that you are uncertain about. How many of you are sitting here with a calling to the ministry of God that you are not responding to? It is incredibly important that you take that step, albeit in fear, albeit in uncertainty, albeit in the thought that I don't have those skills, I can't do this. I've learned that God sets out your way and gives you all that you ever will need to make it happen. You don't see it while it's happening. Believe you me, I had to be 10 or 15 years ahead to look back and say, actually, that was a good thing. One of the most silliest things people will kind of say, that doesn't make sense, is that I suffered abuse. Today, I'm grateful for that experience, because it's taken me to 56 countries. It's taken me to change the lives of maybe thousands, if not millions, of women around the world We don't know where God is going to take us. You have a vision, but the vision may be bigger than, what you actually think. And so in verse 8 it says, "Therefore do not be ashamed of the testimony of our Lord, nor of me his prisoner, but share with me in the sufferings for the gospel according to the power of God, who has saved us and called us with a holy calling, not according to our works, but according to his own purpose. And he gives us the grace, the strength, and the courage to do that."